The human mind is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it has been responsible for our current civilization and all the luxuries we have. But on the other hand, its misuse and lack of awareness have destroyed our inner states, making our lives miserable and our happiness impossible. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle is a book that talks about the problem of mind or ego identification in detail. The author begins by talking about his own transformative experience, when his intense suffering accidentally caused him to disidentify from his egoic mind and find peace, which eventually put him on a path of spiritual journey and the writing of this book. The tendency of the mind is that it always tends to categorize and compare. But in order to understand the teachings of this book effectively, it is better not to compare its terminology with that of other teachings. Otherwise, you will probably become confused. This is because the physical world and the metaphysical or spiritual world are quite different. Some of the words used in this book, like mind and consciousness, are better to be treated as merely stepping stones towards the deeper truth. Now, the purpose of this book is that it serves as a guide or signpost to spiritual enlightenment. From personal experience, I can say that even though for some this may sound like woo woo stuff, its teachings are at the very least worthy of consideration. These truths cannot be mentally understood but only recognized by a deep feeling response, or a sense of recognition from deep within. As Eckhart says in the book, I cannot tell you any spiritual truth that deep within you don't know already. All that I can do is remind you of what you have forgotten. On one level, the author draws your attention to what is false in you and speaks of the nature of human unconsciousness and dysfunction as well as its most common behavioral manifestations, such as conflict in relationships and warfare between tribes or nations. Such knowledge is vital, for unless you learn to recognize the false as false, meaning as not your true nature or reality, there can be no lasting transformation. And you would always end up being drawn back into illusion and into some form of pain. On the very same level, he teaches you how to not end up creating a personal problem or an egoic sense of self out of your own unconsciousness. For this is how the falsehood perpetuates itself. On another level, he speaks of a profound transformation of human consciousness, which can be achieved not in some distant future, but in the very present moment. By showing you how to free yourself from enslavement to the mind, he helps you enter into this enlightened state of consciousness and sustain it in everyday life. Finally, the book points toward the fact that in essence, there is and always has been only one spiritual teaching, although it comes in many different forms. Some of these forms, such as the ancient religions, have become so overlaid with extraneous matter that their spiritual essence has become almost completely obscured by it. Therefore, to a large extent, their deeper meaning is no longer recognized and their transformative power is lost. The author makes a humble attempt to reveal their deeper meaning by occasionally quoting from them. Once there was a beggar sitting near a sidewalk begging for scraps of money. A man suddenly crossed his path and the beggar held out his baseball cap and mumbled, "Please, spare some change." The man responded, "I have nothing to give you." Then he asked the beggar what was the thing that he was sitting on. The beggar said it was just an old box and he can barely remember since he'd been sitting on it. The man asked the beggar, did he ever looked inside? The beggar said that it was pointless, but the man insisted that he take a look. When the beggar opened the lid of the box, he was flabbergasted. The box was filled with gold. This story represents the situation of most people today. Although they might have plenty of material wealth or success, they lack contentment and peace that comes with identification with being. They are looking outside for scraps of pleasure or fulfillment, or love, insecurity, and validation, but they can never truly find it. The sense of lack always remains. Now, the idea of enlightenment is not some superhuman accomplishment, like the ego might want to think, but in fact, it is simply your natural state of felt oneness with being. It is a state of connectedness with something immeasurable and indestructible, something that almost paradoxically, is essentially you and yet is much greater than you. It is finding your true nature beyond name and form. According to Buddha's definition, it is the end of suffering. Although the definition is incomplete because it only tells you what it is not, it is still a good starting point. The inability to feel this connectedness gives rise to the illusion of separation from yourself and from the world around you. You then perceive yourself, consciously or unconsciously, as an isolated fragment. Fear arises, and conflict within and without becomes the norm. Now, what is being? Eckhart defines it as follows: being is the eternal, ever present one life beyond the myriad forms of life that are subject to birth and death. However, being is not only beyond but also deep within every form as its innermost, invisible, and indestructible essence. This means that it is accessible to you now as your own deepest self, your true nature. The definition, of course, cannot be understood mentally and requires an inner experience that one can relate to in order to completely grasp to what it points to. The best synonym for the word being is the word God. So the question is, what is the greatest obstacle to experiencing this reality and the inner peace it brings with it? The answer is our identification with our mind, which causes thought to become compulsive. It is an almost endless cycle of pain where the person is constantly thinking, complaining, judging, criticizing, liking, disliking, and so on. This is a form of addiction where either the person is thinking about the future, which is an illusion, or he is thinking about the past from where his identity comes. As a result, the present moment is sacrificed and becomes a means to an end. If this state is constant in anyone, their entire life becomes suffering at the hands of their tormentor that is sitting in the head. This incessant mental noise prevents you from finding that realm of inner stillness that is inseparable from being. Thinking has become a disease. Disease happens when things get out of balance. For example, there is nothing wrong with cells dividing and multiplying in the body. But when this process continues in disregard, cells proliferate and we have disease. Similarly, the mind is a superb instrument if used rightly, but if used wrongly, it becomes very destructive. Just as dogs love to chew bones, the mind loves to get its teeth into problems. But you, as your soul and being, have no interest in either. You should be able to free yourself of your mind whenever you want to. The goal is to find the off button. Freeing yourself from your mind. The first way to free yourself from your mind is watching the thinker. When someone goes to the doctor and says, "I hear a voice in my head," he or she will most likely be sent to a psychiatrist. The fact is that, in a very similar way, virtually everyone hears a voice or several voices in their head all the time. The voice isn't necessarily relevant to the situation you find yourself in at the time. It may be reviving the recent or distant past or rehearsing or imagining possible future situations. Here it often imagines things going wrong and negative outcomes. This is called worry. Sometimes this soundtrack is accompanied by visual images or mental movies. Even if the voice is relevant to the situation at hand, it will interpret it in terms of the past. This is because the voice belongs to your conditioned mind, which is the result of all your past history as well as of the collective cultural mindset you inherited. So you see and judge the present through the eyes of the past and get a totally distorted view of it. Watching the thinker means listening to the voice in your head as much as you can and paying particular attention to any repetitive thought patterns. When you listen to your voice, listen to it impartially without judging. For doing so would mean that the same voice has come in again through the back door. When you'll do this, the thought would lose its power over you and quickly subside, because you are no longer energizing the mind through identification with it. When a thought subsides, you experience a discontinuity in the mental stream, a gap of no mind. At first, the gaps will be short, few seconds perhaps, but gradually they will become longer. When these gaps occur, you feel a certain stillness and peace inside you. This is the beginning of your natural state of felt oneness with being. Keep in mind that it is not a trance-like state, and there is no loss of consciousness in it. Instead of watching the thinker, you can also create a gap in the mind stream simply by directing the focus of your attention into the now. Just become intensely conscious of the present moment. In this way, you draw consciousness away from mind activity and create a gap of no mind in which you are highly alert and aware but not thinking. This is the essence of meditation. Now, some might ask that isn't the gift of thought the most precious thing we have? Without it, we would be just another species of animals. To this question, Eckhart responds by saying, enlightenment means rising above thought. In the enlightened state, you will still use your thinking mind when needed, but in a much more focused and effective way than before. You use it mostly for practical purposes, but you are free of the involuntary internal dialogue and there is inner stillness. When you do use your mind, and particularly when a creative solution is needed, you oscillate every few minutes or so between thought and stillness, between mind and no mind. No mind is consciousness without thought. Only in that way is it possible to think creatively, because only in that way does thought have any real power. Thought alone, when it is no longer connected with the much vaster realm of consciousness, quickly becomes barren, insane, destructive. Emotion, the body's reaction to your mind. Emotion arises at the place where the mind and body meet, or in simple words, it is the body's reaction to the mind and its chatter. For example, a hostile thought will create a buildup of energy in the body that we call anger. The body is getting ready to fight. The thought that you are being threatened, physically or psychologically, causes the body to contract, and this is the physical side of what we call fear. Now, the more you are identified with your thinking, your likes and dislikes, judgments and interpretations, which is to say, the less present you are as the watcher, the stronger the emotional charge will be, and you may not even be aware of it. Also, it is important to be somewhat in touch with your emotions, because if you are completely cut off from them, you will experience them on a purely physical level. Now, one may ask that if emotions are really the mind's reflection in the body, why do sometimes we have conflict between our mind and our emotions? Which is to say, our emotions are in a completely different direction than our minds. The answer to this is that if you really want to know your mind, the body will always give you a truthful reflection. If there is an apparent conflict between them, the thought will be the lie and the emotion will be the truth. Not the ultimate truth of who you are, but the relative truth of your state of mind at that time. The greater part of human pain is unnecessary. It is self-created. And as long as the unobserved mind runs your life, you are going to keep creating it. The pain that you create now is always some form of non-acceptance, some form of unconscious resistance to what is. On the level of thought, the resistance is some form of judgment, whereas on the emotional level, it is some form of negativity. The intensity of the pain depends on the degree of resistance to the present moment. And this in turn depends on how strongly you are identified with your mind. The mind always seeks to deny the now and to escape from it, which means that the more you are identified with your mind, the more you suffer. Similarly, the more you are able to honor and accept the present moment, the more you are free of pain or suffering and free of the egoic mind. If you no longer want to create pain for yourself and others, then don't create any more time, or at least no more than is necessary to deal with the practical aspects of your life. How to stop creating time? Realize deeply that the present moment is all you ever have. Make the now the primary focus of your life. Whereas before you dwelt in time and paid brief visits to the present moment, now you have your dwelling place in the present and pay brief visits to past and future. Now the question is that the present moment is sometimes unacceptable, unpleasant, or awful. Well, the thing is that this is a judgment of the mind. You need to observe how the mind labels it, and how this labeling process creates pain and unhappiness. By watching the mechanics of the mind, you step out of its resistance patterns. This will give you a taste of the state of inner freedom from external conditions, which is the state of true inner peace. Then see what happens and take action if necessary or possible. To simplify, accept, then act. Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it. Always work with it and not against it. Make it your friend and ally, not your enemy. Past pain, dissolving the pain body. As long as you are unable to access the power of now, every emotional pain that you experience leaves behind a residue of pain that lives on in you. It merges with the pain from the past, which was already there, and becomes lodged in your mind and body. This, of course, includes the pain you suffered as a child, caused by the unconsciousness of the world into which you were born. The pain body has two modes, dormant and active. In most people, it may be dormant 90% of the time, but in a deeply unhappy person, though, it may be active 100% of the time. You see, some people live almost entirely through their pain body. On the other hand, some may experience it only in certain situations, such as intimate relationships or situations linked with past loss or abandonment, and so on. It can be triggered and turned on by almost anything, particularly if it resonates with a pain pattern from your past. When it is ready to awaken from its dormant stage, even a thought or an innocent remark made by someone close to you can activate it. Now, some pain bodies are obnoxious but relatively harmless. For example, like a child who won't stop whining. Other pain bodies are vicious and destructive monsters, and they can be true demons. Some are physically violent, whereas many more are emotionally violent. When you live through your pain body, thoughts and feelings you have about your life then become deeply negative and self destructive. Illnesses and accidents are often created in this way. Some pain bodies even drive their host to suicide. The goal of the pain body is that it wants to survive, just like any other entity in existence. And it can only survive if it gets you to unconsciously identify with it. It can then rise up, take you over, and live through you. So, the pain body doesn't want you to observe it directly and see it for what it is, but the moment you observe it, feel its energy field within you, and take your attention into it, the identification is broken. A higher dimension of consciousness has just come in. Eckhart calls it presence. The result of this is that you become the witness or the watcher of the pain body, which means that it cannot use you anymore by pretending to be you, and it can no longer replenish itself through you. Being successful at it means that you have found your own innermost strength. You have accessed the power of now. Don't seek yourself in the mind. You might be tempted to think that you must learn about all the different ways the mind works before you can disidentify from it. But just like studying about madness cannot ensure your sanity, studying the mind will not ensure that you stop identifying from the egoic mind. The problem of the mind cannot be solved on the level of the mind. Once you have understood the basic dysfunction, there isn't really much else that you need to learn or understand. Now, something worth remembering is that the ego's needs are endless. It feels vulnerable and threatened, and so lives in a state of fear and want. Once you know how the basic dysfunction operates, there is no need to explore all its countless manifestations deeply. No need to make it into a complex personal problem. Obviously, the ego would love to do that because of its very nature. It is always seeking for something to attach itself to in order to uphold and strengthen its illusory sense of self, and it will readily attach itself to your problems. This is why, for so many people, a large part of their sense of self is intimately connected with their problems. Once this has happened, the last thing they want to do is to become free of them, because for the ego, it would literally mean losing yourself. And the illusion of time. Time and mind are inseparable. Remove time from the mind and it stops. Of course, other than when you're using it. To be identified with your mind is to be trapped in time, meaning the compulsion to live almost exclusively through memory and anticipation. This creates an endless preoccupation with past and future, and an unwillingness to honor and acknowledge the present moment and allow it to be. The compulsion arises because the past gives you an identity and the future holds the promise of salvation or fulfillment in whatever form. Both of these are illusions. Now, one may ask that without the sense of time, how would we function in the society? The implication being that time is precious and thinking about the past and the future is important. Well, not that it isn't, but the past is gone and the future isn't here yet. When you had the past, it wasn't the past, it was the present. And similarly, when you will have the future, it will no longer be the future, it will be the present. No matter which point you are in, what you really and actually have is the present moment. The key to the spiritual dimension. In life threatening emergency situations, the shift in consciousness from time to presence sometimes happens naturally. Anyone who has gone through some immediate crisis or danger knows that. The reason why some people love to engage in dangerous activities such as mountain climbing, car racing, and so on, although they may not be aware of it, is because it forces them into the now. It forces them into the intensely alive state that is free of time, free of problems, free of thinking, and even free of the burden of the personality. At other moments, slipping away from the present moment, even for a second, may literally seem like death. And so, unfortunately, they come to depend on a particular activity to be in that state. Since ancient times, spiritual masters of all traditions have pointed to the now as the key to the spiritual dimension. The whole essence of Zen consists in walking along the razor's edge of now, to be so utterly, completely present that no problem, no suffering, nothing that is not who you are in your essence can survive in you. In the absence of time, all your problems dissolve. As the author says, suffering needs time. It cannot survive in the now. Some of the great Zen masters, in order to take their students' attention away from time, would often raise their finger and slowly ask, "What at this moment is lacking?" A powerful question that does not require an answer on the level of the mind. It is designed to take your attention deeply into the now. A similar question in the Zen tradition is, if not now, when? Mr. Eckhart, a 13th century spiritual teacher, summed it all up as follows: time is what keeps the light from reaching us. There is no greater obstacle to God than time. With the timeless dimension comes a different kind of knowing, one that does not quote unquote kill the spirit that lives within every creature and everything. A knowing that does not destroy the sacredness and mystery of life, but contains a deep love and reverence for all that is. A knowing of which the mind knows nothing. As one student professed his experience as follows in the book. A moment ago, when you talked about the eternal present and the unreality of past and future, I found myself looking at the tree outside the window. I had looked at it a few times before, but this time was different. The external perception had not changed much, except that the colors seemed brighter and more vibrant. But there was an added dimension to it. This is hard to explain. I don't know how, but I was aware of something invisible that I felt was the essence of the tree. Its inner spirit, if you like. And somehow I was part of that. I realize now that I hadn't truly seen the tree before, just a flat and dead image of it. When I look at the tree now, some of that awareness is still present, but I can feel it slipping away. You see, the experience is already receding into the past. Can something like this ever be more than just a fleeting glimpse? Letting go of psychological time. It is best to use time only in the practical aspects of your life. Let's call this kind of time clock time. But when the practical matters have been dealt with, you must immediately withdraw to the present moment. In this way, there will be no build-up of psychological time, which is identification with the past and continuous compulsive projection into the future. Clock time is not just making an appointment or planning a trip. It includes learning from the past so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, setting goals and working towards them, predicting the future by means of patterns and laws from the past, and taking appropriate action on the basis of our predictions. But even here, within the sphere of practical living, where we cannot do without reference to past and future, the present moment remains the essential factor. Because any lesson from the past becomes relevant and is applied in the present moment. Any planning as well as working towards achieving a particular goal is done now. The enlightened person's main focus of attention is always the now, but on the periphery, they are still aware of time. In other words, they continue to use clock time but are free of psychological time. It is important to be alert as you practice this so that you do not unwittingly transform clock time into psychological time. For example, if you made a mistake in the past and learn from it now, you are using clock time. On the other hand, if you dwell on it mentally and, as a result, self criticism, remorse, or guilt come up, then you are making a mistake. You are making it a part of your sense of self and it will become psychological time, which is always linked to a false sense of identity. Similarly, non forgiveness also implies a heavy burden of psychological time. The insanity of psychological time. You will not have any doubt that psychological time is a mental disease if you look at its collective manifestations. For example, in the form of ideologies such as communism, National Socialism, any nationalism, or rigid religious belief systems, which usually operate under the implicit assumption that the highest good lies in the future, and so the end justifies the means. But as far as basic human nature is concerned, the future is usually the replica of the past. The end is an idea, a point in the mind projected future, when salvation in whatever form, like happiness, fulfillment, equality, liberation, and so on, will be attained. And so oftentimes, the means of getting there are enslavement, torture, and murder of people in the present. Another example can be a person who may win millions of dollars. That kind of change is also superficial. Without the right awareness, he would simply continue to act out the same conditioned patterns in a more luxurious lifestyle. To be free of time is to be free of the psychological need of past for your identity and future for your fulfillment. It represents the most profound transformation of consciousness that one can imagine. In some rare cases, this shift in consciousness happens dramatically and radically. When it does, it usually comes about through total surrender in the midst of intense suffering. Most people, however, have to work at it. When you have had your first few glimpses of the timeless state of consciousness, you begin to move back and forth between the dimensions of time and presence. First, you become aware of just how rarely your attention is truly in the now. But to know that you are not present is in and of itself a great success, because that knowing is also the same as being present, even though if initially it only lasts for a couple of seconds before it is lost again. Then later on, with increasing frequency, you choose to have the focus of your consciousness in the present moment rather than in the past or future. Ordinary unconsciousness and deep unconsciousness. When you're sleeping, you constantly move between the phases of dreamless sleep and the dream state. Similarly, in wakefulness, most people only shift between ordinary unconsciousness and deep unconsciousness. Ordinary unconsciousness means being identified with your thought processes, emotions, reactions, desires, and aversions. It is most people's normal state. In that state, you are run by the egoic mind, and in Eckhart's terms, you are unaware of being. It is a state not of acute pain or unhappiness, but of an almost continuous low level of unease, discontent, boredom, or nervousness, like a background static. You may not realize this because it is so much a part of quote unquote normal living, just as you are not aware of a continuous low background noise, such as the hum of an air conditioner, until it stops. When it suddenly does stop, there is a sense of relief. Many people use alcohol, drugs, sex, food, work, television, or even shopping as anesthetics in an unconscious attempt to remove the basic unease. When this happens, an activity that might be very enjoyable if used in moderation becomes imbued with a compulsive or addictive quality, and all that is ever achieved through it is extremely short-lived symptom relief. In ordinary unconsciousness, habitual resistance or denial of what is creates the unease and discontent that most people accept as normal living. When this resistance becomes intensified through some challenge or threat to the ego, It brings up intense negativity such as anger, acute fear, aggression, depression, and so on. If you cannot be present even in normal circumstances, such as when you are sitting alone in a room, walking in the woods, or listening to someone, then you certainly won't be able to stay conscious when something goes wrong or you are faced with difficult people or situations. When you learn to be the witness of your thoughts and emotions, which is an essential part of being present, you may be surprised when you first become aware of the background static of ordinary unconsciousness and realize how rarely you are truly at ease within yourself. On the level of your thinking, you will find a great deal of resistance in the form of judgment, discontent, and mental projection away from the now. On the emotional level, there will be an undercurrent of unease, tension, or nervousness. Both are aspects of the mind in its habitual resistance mode. The starting point to wellness is the ability to monitor your emotional and mental state through self-observation. Am I at ease at this moment? Is a good question to ask yourself frequently. Or you can ask, what's going on inside me at this moment? If you get the inside right, the outside will fall into place as well. Once you detect that there is a low level of unease, which is the background static, see in what way you are avoiding, resisting, or denying life, which, of course, usually means denying the present moment. There are many ways in which people unconsciously resist the present moment. For example, a crappy job which the mind considers as a means to an end, or having unspoken resentment towards a person that you cannot leave or let go of. If you have a choice, let go of that person. And if you don't have a choice, let go of the resentment. Don't ruin the joy and happiness of the moment. Negativity is rarely the optimum way of dealing with any situation. In fact, in most cases, it keeps you stuck in it, blocking any real change. Anything that is done with a negative energy will become contaminated by it and in time give rise to more pain and more unhappiness. Furthermore, any negative inner state is contagious. Unhappiness spreads more easily than a physical disease. Through the law of resonance, it triggers and feeds latent negativity in others, unless they are immune, that is, highly present and conscious. As long as you are in a state of intense presence, you are still yet highly alert. But the instant your conscious attention sinks below a certain level, thought rushes in. The mental noise returns, the stillness is lost, and you are back in time. To test their degree of presence, some Zen masters have been known to creep up on their students from behind and suddenly hit them with a stick. If the student had been fully present and in a state of alertness, he would have noticed the master coming up from behind and stopped him or stepped aside. But if he were hit, that would mean he was immersed in thought, which is to say absent and unconscious. To stay present in everyday life, it helps to be deeply rooted within yourself. Otherwise, the mind, which has incredible momentum, will drag you along like a wild river. Now, what is meant by being rooted within yourself? It means to inhabit your body fully and to always have some of your attention in the inner energy field of your body, to feel the body from within, so to speak. The esoteric meaning of waiting. In a sense, the state of presence could be compared to waiting. Jesus used the analogy of waiting in some of his parables. This is not the usual bored or restless kind of waiting that is a denial of the present. It is not a waiting in which your attention is focused on some point in the future and the present is perceived as an undesirable obstacle that prevents you from having what you want. There is a qualitatively different kind of waiting, one that requires your total alertness. Something could happen at any moment, and if you are not absolutely awake, absolutely still, you will miss it. When in this state, all your attention is in the present moment, and there is none of it left for daydreaming, thinking, remembering, and anticipating. In that state, the you that has a past and a future is hardly there anymore, and yet nothing of value is lost. You are still essentially yourself. In fact, you are now fully yourself than you were ever before. The mind, because of its very nature, can neither recognize nor create beauty. It also cannot recognize the essence and sacredness of nature. It can only label and make an attempt to interpret things. And so, the wider the time gap between perception and thought, the more depth there is to you as a human being. Many people are so imprisoned in their minds that the beauty of nature does not really exist for them. They might say, "What a pretty flower," but that's just a mechanical mental labeling. Because they are not still and not present, they don't truly see the flower. Because we live in such a mind dominated culture, most modern art, architecture, and music are devoid of beauty and devoid of inner essence with very few exceptions. The reason is that the people who create those things cannot even for a moment free themselves from their mind, and so they are never in touch with that place within from where true creativity and beauty arises. Realizing pure consciousness. Whenever consciousness frees itself from its identification with physical and mental forms, it becomes what we may call pure or enlightened consciousness. But as for most humans, they are still continually in the grip of the egoic mode of consciousness. If they do not learn how to free themselves from their mind in time, they will be destroyed by it. They will experience increasing confusion, conflict, and madness. For most people possessed by the egoic mind, the only respite they find from their own minds is to occasionally revert to a level of consciousness below thought. Everyone does that every night during sleep. But this also happens to some extent through sex, alcohol, and other drugs that suppress excessive mind activity. If it weren't for alcohol, tranquilizers, antidepressants, as well as the illegal drugs, which are all consumed in vast quantities, the insanity of the human mind would become even more glaringly obvious than it is already. These drugs, of course, simply keep you stuck in dysfunction. Their widespread use only delays the breakdown of the old mind structures and the emergence of higher consciousness, which is true liberation, of course. On the other hand, falling back to a level of consciousness below mind, which is the pre-thinking level of our distant ancestors and of animals and plants, is not an option for us. There is no way back. If the human race is to survive, it will have to go on to the next stage. Consciousness is evolving throughout the universe in billions of forms. The body that you can see and touch cannot take you into being, but that visible and tangible body is only an outer shell, or rather a limited and distorted perception of a deeper reality. In your natural state of connectedness with being, this deeper reality can be felt every moment as the invisible inner body, which is an animating presence within you. So, to quote unquote inhabit the body is to feel the body from within, to feel the life inside the body and thereby to come to know that you are beyond the outer form. But that is only the beginning of an inward journey that will take you even more deeply into a realm of great stillness and peace, and a realm that is also greatly powerful and vibrant with life. Underneath your outer form, you are connected with something so vast, so immeasurable and sacred that it cannot be conceived or spoken of. I am speaking of it not to give you something to believe in, but to show you how you can know it for yourself. When your mind takes up all of your attention, you are cut off from being and are not in the body. The mind then absorbs all of your consciousness and transforms it into mind stuff. The result is that you cannot stop thinking. To become conscious of being, you need to reclaim consciousness from the mind. This is one of the most essential tasks for spiritual enlightenment. It will free vast amounts of consciousness that was previously trapped in useless and compulsive thinking. A very effective way of doing this is simply to take the focus of your attention away from thinking and direct it into the body, where being can be felt in the first instance as the invisible energy field that gives life to what you perceive as the physical body. Connecting with the inner body. The following is an exercise that you can do almost immediately and at any time to withdraw consciousness from the mind. Close your eyes, direct your attention into the body, feel it from within. Is it alive? Is there life in your hands, arms, legs, and feet, in your abdomen, your chest? Can you feel the subtle energy field that pervades the entire body and gives vibrant life to every organ and every cell? Can you feel it simultaneously in all parts of the body as a single field of energy? Keep focusing on the feeling of your inner body for a few moments. Do not start to think about it. Feel it. The more attention you give it, the clearer and stronger this feeling will become. It will feel as if every cell is becoming more alive, and if you have a strong visual sense, you may get an image of your body becoming luminous. Although such an image can help you temporarily, pay more attention to the feeling than to any image that may arise. An image, no matter how beautiful or powerful, is already defined in form, so there is less scope for penetrating more deeply. Transformation through the body. Why have most religions condemned or denied the body? It seems that spiritual seekers have always regarded the body as a hindrance or even as sinful. Now, the answer to this question is that on the level of the body, humans are very close to animals. All the basic bodily functions, pleasure, pain, breathing, eating, drinking, defecating, sleeping, the drive to find a mate and procreate, and of course, birth and death. We share all of these qualities with the animals. A long time after their fall from a state of grace and oneness into illusion, humans suddenly woke up in what seemed to be an animal body, and they found this very disturbing. Don't fool yourself, you are no more than an animal. This seemed to be the truth that was staring them in the face, but it was too disturbing a truth to tolerate. Adam and Eve saw that they were naked and they became afraid. Unconscious denial of their animal nature set in very quickly. The threat that they might be taken over by powerful instinctual drives and revert back to complete unconsciousness was indeed a very real one. Shame and taboos appeared around certain parts of the body and bodily functions, especially sexuality. The light of their consciousness was not yet very strong to make friends with their animal nature, to allow it to be and even enjoy that aspect of themselves, let alone go deeply into it to find the divine hidden within it. And so they began to dissociate from their body. They now saw themselves as having a body rather than just being it. Have deep roots within. The key is to be in a state of permanent connectedness with your inner body and to feel it at all times. This will rapidly deepen and transform your life. The more consciousness you direct into the inner body, the higher its vibrational frequency becomes. Much like a light that grows brighter as you turn up the switch and so increase the flow of electricity. At this higher energy level, negativity cannot affect you anymore, and you tend to attract new circumstances that reflect this higher frequency. If you keep your attention in the body as much as possible, you will be anchored into the present moment. You won't lose yourself in the external world, and you won't lose yourself in your mind. Thoughts and emotions, fears and desires may still be there to some extent, but they won't take you over. Before you enter the body, forgive. Attention is the key to transformation, and full attention also implies acceptance. Attention is like a beam of light, the focused power of your consciousness that transmutes everything into itself. In a fully functional organism, an emotion has a very short lifespan. It is like a momentary ripple or wave on the surface of your being. When you are not in your body, however, an emotion can survive inside you for days or weeks, or join with other emotions of a similar frequency that have merged and become the pain body. The parasite that can live inside you for years and make your life miserable. Slowing down the aging process. In the meantime, awareness of the inner body has other benefits in the physical realm. One of them is a significant slowing down of the aging of the physical body. Whereas the outer body normally appears to grow old and wither fairly quickly, the inner body does not change with time, except that you may feel it more deeply and become it more fully. If you are 20 years old now, the energy field of your inner body will feel just the same when you are 80. It will be just as vibrantly alive. As soon as your habitual state changes from being out of the body and trapped in your mind to being in the body and present in the now, your physical body will feel lighter, clearer, and more alive. As there is more consciousness in the body, its molecular structure actually becomes less dense. More consciousness means a lessening of the illusion of materiality, strengthening the immune system. Another benefit of this practice in the physical realm is a great strengthening of the immune system. The more consciousness you bring into the body, the stronger the immune system becomes. On the other hand, most illnesses creep in when you are not present in the body. If the master is not present in the house, all kinds of shady characters will take up residence there. When you do inhabit your body, it will be hard for unwanted guests to enter. Let the breath take you into the body. If at any time you are finding it hard to get in touch with the inner body, it is usually easier to focus on your breathing first. Conscious breathing, which is a powerful meditation in its own right, will gradually put you in touch with the body. Follow the breath with your attention as it moves in and out of your body. Breathe into the body and feel your abdomen expanding and contracting slightly with each inhalation and exhalation. Having access to what Eckhart calls the formless realm or the unmanifested is truly liberating. When you have such access, you can free yourself from the world of form and find peace whenever you want to. If done rightly, meditation is a great way to access the unmanifested. 10 to 15 minutes long meditation is sufficient for this. Pay attention to the following process to perform such meditation. Make sure first that there are no external distractions such as telephones or people who are likely to interrupt you. Then sit on a chair, but don't lean back. Keep the spine erect. Doing so will help you stay alert. If sitting doesn't seem right for you, you choose your own favorite position. Make sure the body is relaxed. Close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, feel yourself breathing into the lower abdomen, as it were. Observe how it expands and contracts slightly with each in and out breath. Then become aware of the entire inner energy field of the body. Don't think about it, just feel it. By doing this, you reclaim consciousness from the mind. If you find it helpful, you can find light form of visualization of energy flowing in the beginning. When you can feel the inner body clearly as a single field of energy, let go, if possible, of any visual image and focus exclusively on the feeling. If you can, also drop any mental image you may still have of the physical body. All that is left then is an all-encompassing sense of presence or beingness, and the inner body is felt to be without boundary. Then take your attention even more deeply into that feeling, become one with it. Merge with the inner energy field so that there is no longer a perceived duality of the observer and the observed, of you and your body. The distinction between inner and outer also dissolves now, so there is no inner body anymore. By going deeply into the body, you have transcended the body. After staying in this realm of pure being for as long as feels comfortable, you then become aware again of the physical body and open your eyes. You look at your surroundings for a few minutes in a meditative way, that is, without labeling them mentally, and continue to feel the inner body as you do so. The source of Qi. Qi is a kind of universal life energy known in the East. In traditional Chinese culture, it is believed to be a vital force-forming part of any living entity, and is the central underlying principle in Chinese traditional medicine and in Chinese martial arts. Now, often there comes a misconception that the Qi is the unmanifested, but in fact, it is the exact opposite. The unmanifested is the source of Qi. Qi is the inner energy field of your body, the bridge between the physical, outer you and the source or the eternal, ever-present one life. It lies halfway between the manifested, the world of form, and the source or the unmanifested. And it is a link between the unmanifested and the physical universe. Qi can be likened to a river or an energy stream. If you take the focus of your consciousness deeply into the inner body, you are tracing the course of this river back to its source. However, Qi is movement, but the unmanifested is stillness. If you are lonely and without a partner, enter the now from there. And if you do have a partner, enter the now from there. Many people might be tempted to think that finding a good partner will bring them the salvation, and so they keep looking towards that point in the future when such a person enters their life. This is also an illusion created by the mind. There is nothing you can ever do or attain that will get you closer to salvation than it is at this moment. This may be hard to grasp for a mind accustomed to thinking that everything worthwhile is in the future. Love hate relationships. Unless and until you access the consciousness frequency of presence and attain inner peace, all relationships, particularly intimate relationships, are deeply flawed and are ultimately dysfunctional. They may seem perfect for a while, such as when you are quote unquote in love, but invariably that apparent perfection gets disrupted as arguments, conflicts, and dissatisfaction occur with increasing frequency. Therefore, it seems that most quote unquote love relationships eventually become love hate relationships. Love can then turn into savage attack, feelings of hostility, or complete withdrawal of affection at the flick of a switch. And the funny thing is that this is all considered normal. The relationship then oscillates for a few months or a few years between the polarities of love and hate. And at the end of the day, it gives you as much pleasure as it gives you pain. It may appear that if you could only eliminate the negative or disruptive cycles, then all would be well and the relationship would flow beautifully. But this is not possible. The polarities are mutually interdependent. You cannot have one without the other. The positive already contains within itself the as yet unmanifested negative. Both are in fact different aspects of the same dysfunction. What we can call true love does not originate from the mind and its need for attachment. It arises from the state of presence and a state of fulfillment. However, brief and elusive glimpses of love are possible whenever there is a gap in the stream of mind. Addiction and the search for wholeness. The reason why the romantic relationship is such an intense and sought after experience is that it seems to offer liberation from a deep seated state of fear, need, and incompleteness that is part of the human condition in its unredeemed and unenlightened state. There is both a physical and a psychological dimension to this state. On the physical level, you are obviously not whole, nor will you ever be. You are either a man or a woman, which is to say, one half of the whole. On this level, the longing for wholeness manifests as male female attraction. Man's need for a woman and a woman's need for a man. The root of this physical urge is a spiritual one. That is the longing for an end to duality, a return to the state of wholeness. That is why sexual union is the closest you can get to this state on the physical level, and why it is the most deeply satisfying experience the physical realm can offer. But sexual union is no more than a fleeting glimpse of wholeness. As long as it is unconsciously sought as a means of salvation, you are seeking the end of duality on the level of form where it cannot be found. On the psychological level, the sense of lack and incompleteness is even greater than on the physical level. As long as you are identified with the mind, you have an externally derived sense of self, meaning that you get your sense of who you are from things that ultimately have nothing to do with who you really are. Things like your social role, possessions, etc. And so the partner aids you in giving an externally derived source of attachment. It is the ego's substitute for salvation, and for a short time it almost does feel like salvation. But there comes a point when your partner behaves in ways that fail to meet your needs, or rather, those of your ego. And so the negative end of the cycle starts. So, how do we make the dysfunctional kind of relationships into enlightened relationships? Being present and intensifying your presence by taking your attention ever more deeply into the now. Whether you are living alone or with a partner, this remains the key. For love to flourish, the light of your presence needs to be strong enough so that you no longer get taken over by the thinker or the pain body and mistake them for who you really are. The difference between happiness and inner peace is that happiness is outcome dependent. Whereas true inner peace is not outcome dependent. When the external conditions are being perceived to be positive, you are happy. And when that is not the case, you are unhappy. Now, seen from a higher perspective, conditions are always positive. Or to be more precise, they are neither positive nor negative. Whenever anything negative happens to you, there is a deep lesson concealed within it, although you may not see it at that time. Even a brief illness or an accident can show you what is real and unreal in your life, what ultimately matters and what doesn't. Simply put, things are as they are. And when you live in complete acceptance of what is, which is the only sane way to live, there is no good or bad in your life anymore. There is only a higher good, which also includes the bad. Seen from the perspective of the mind, however, there is good and bad, like and dislike, love and hate, etc. Keep in mind that this kind of acceptance is not the same as deceiving or deluding yourself into believing that things are great even when it is not the case, and there is something that you can do about the situation. Contrary to being delusional, acceptance brings with it the seed of initiative and proactive decision making. Whenever improvement is possible, it is done. However, when it is not possible, you simply accept the situation and surrender. There can be no peace with mental resistance. The end of your life drama. Whenever two or more egos come together, drama of one kind or another ensues. But even if you live totally alone, you can still create your own drama. When you feel sorry for yourself, that's drama. When you feel guilty or anxious, that's drama. When you let the past or future obscure the present, you are creating psychological time, the stuff out of which drama is made. Whenever you are not honoring the present moment by allowing it to be, you are creating drama. On the other hand, when you live in complete acceptance of what is, that is the end of all drama in your life. Nobody can even have an argument with you, no matter how hard he or she tries. Impermanence and the cycles of life. On the level of form, there is birth and death, creation and destruction, growth and dissolution of seemingly separate forms. This is reflected everywhere in the life cycle of a star or a planet, a physical body, a tree, a flower, in the rise and fall of nations, political systems, civilizations, and in the inevitable cycles of gain and loss in the life of an individual. There are cycles of success, like things coming to you and thriving, and cycles of failure when they wither or disintegrate, and you have to let them go in order to make room for new things to arise or for transformation. If you cling and resist at that point, it means you are refusing to go with the flow of life and you will suffer. Also, it is not true that the up cycle is good and the down cycle is bad, except in the mind's judgment. Growth is usually considered positive, but nothing can grow forever. If growth of whatever kind were to go on, it would eventually become monstrous and destructive. Dissolution is needed for new growth to happen. One cannot exist without the other. The down cycle is absolutely essential for spiritual realization. If you are drawn to the spiritual dimension, you must have failed deeply on some level or experienced some deep loss or pain. Or perhaps your very success became empty and meaningless and so turned out to be a failure. You see, failure lies concealed in every success, and success in every failure. In this world, which is to say on the level of form, everybody fails sooner or later, and every achievement eventually comes to naught. All forms are impermanent. To some people, surrender may have negative connotations, implying defeat, giving up, failing to rise to the challenges of life, becoming lethargic, and so on. However, true surrender is something entirely different. It does not mean to passively put up with whatever situation you find yourself in and to do nothing about it. Nor does it mean to cease making plans or initiating positive action. Surrender is the simple but profound wisdom of yielding to rather than opposing the flow of life. The only place where you can experience the flow of life is the present moment. So, to surrender is to accept the present moment unconditionally and without reservation. It is to relinquish inner resistance to what is. Inner resistance meaning to say no to what is through mental judgment and emotional negativity. It becomes particularly pronounced when things go wrong, which means that there is a gap between the demands or rigid expectations of your mind and what is. That is the pain gap. In life, things go wrong quite often. It is precisely at those times that surrender needs to be practiced if you want to eliminate pain and sorrow from your life. Acceptance of what is immediately frees you from mind identification and thus reconnects you with being. Resistance is the mind. Until you practice surrender, the spiritual dimension is something you read about, talk about, get excited about, write books about, think about, believe in, or don't. As the case may be, it makes no difference. Not until you surrender does it become a living reality in your life. Surrender in personal relationships. The people who try to use, manipulate, or control you unconsciously attempt to get energy and power from you. It is true that only an unconscious person will try to use or manipulate others. But it is equally true that only an unconscious person can be used and manipulated. If you resist or fight unconscious behavior in others, you become unconscious yourself. But surrender doesn't mean that you allow yourself to be used by unconscious people. Not at all. It is perfectly possible to say no firmly and clearly to a person or to walk away from a situation and be in a state of complete inner non resistance at the same time. When you say no to a person or a situation, let it come not from a reaction but from insight, from a close realization of what is right or not right for you at that moment. Let it be a non reactive, quote unquote, high quality no. A no that is free from all negativity and so creates no further suffering. When dealing with violence or aggression, remember the deep wisdom underlying the practice of Eastern martial arts, which is doing whatever you do in a non reactive, proactive way. Don't resist the opponent's force, yield to overcome.